Now, 2 months to go until the US presidential election. Yesterday's US Labor Day, traditionally marking the start of what's known as the final stretch of the race. Both the Trump and Harris campaigns focusing on some key swing states that will likely decide the outcome. It is then a frenetic 9-week sprint to a November the 5th voting day that many regard as perhaps the most consequential election in modern memory. The state of the presidential race, though, in early September, often seen as a pretty decent indicator of where things are likely to end up at the polls on election day. Well, international affairs commentator Doug Herbert is joining me here on set. So, Doug, 9 weeks to go. Would you believe it? Where do we stand?
Yeah, 9 weeks goes like that in American politics, Stuart. Yeah. I think the danger here is oversimplifying things. The narrative has been an amazing bolt out of the starting blocks for Kamala Harris and her running mate, Tim Walz, and the past few weeks. And the momentum has been with them. And yes, she has done what Biden was unable to do, which is to start in some national polls pulling away from Trump. That is solidifying her lead in a lot on the national level. Now, I need to say I'm going to show our viewers and you some poll numbers from a latest poll, ABC News and Ipsos, conducted August 23rd to 27th after the DNC. And I'm going to tell you why we need to take those poll numbers with a grain of salt, and they come with a big asterisk. So you see this all registered voters. Kamala has a 4-point lead, 50 to 46%. Among likely voters, perhaps a more important number, those voters actually say, yeah, not only am I registered, but I'm also going to go to the polls. That's a 6-point lead, 52 to 46%. Now we could take that down, and I will say why you should really, if not disregard that, take with a grain of salt. We know about the Electoral College, right? We have done reports on the Electoral College. It was devised in the U.S. as the system, the intent being to give small, often mostly rural states, as much weight, if not more weight, than more populous ones, the ones with the urban centers and the dense media markets. A lot of critics of the Electoral College say that the result is that you are giving way too far representation to areas that have almost no one in them at the expense of big cities and metropolitan areas in the U.S. That said, given that, when you ask me where things stand today, the picture is much tighter in the so-called battleground states. And Stuart, when I speak about battlegrounds today, I really divide it into two fronts. You have the so-called Rust Belt states, where the working class bastions are, in Michigan and Wisconsin and Pennsylvania. And Pennsylvania is where Kamala and Joe Biden jointly appeared for the first time yesterday. Talk about that in a second. Then you have the so-called Sun Belt states, which are in the Sun Belt, right? The Arizona, the Nevada, the Georgias, the North Carolinas. Now, Harris, according to these most polls, remember we're talking about averages of polls, has slim lead, very modest in the Rust Belt, in those three northern states. She has, it's razor thin with Trump slightly leading in the Sun Belt right now. And if you look at the overall picture in these battlegrounds, as of today, Stuart, the overall picture is Trump has a lead, a very slight one, in 4 of the 7 battleground states, which is why I say those numbers need to be taken in that larger context.
You talked about Kamala Harris and Joe Biden appearing together for their first joint campaign. Pennsylvania it was, Union stronghold. Let's have a listen to Kamala Harris, what she had to say.
Unions, because unions helped build America, and unions helped build America's middle class. For generations in Detroit and across our nation, the brothers and sisters of labor have stood together to righteously demand fair pay, better benefits, and safe working conditions. And let me say, every person in our nation has benefited from that work.
Kamala Harris there really saying how good unions have been for the U.S. and continue to be.
And how important are they in this election? And I suppose the answer to that, Stuart, is very important, not important. And what do I mean by that? About 1 in 10 American workers of voting age are members of unions. That's 10%. Now, from a European perspective, that's nothing, right? So unions are talked up in general election campaigns. They do have big, perhaps outsized political influence, especially in these Rust Belt states where the working middle class are major constituencies. But on the national map, unions are not as important, for better or for worse. That said, the Democrats historically have done very well with unions, right? They're supposed to be the party of unions. Way back in 1992, Bill Clinton won the unions by over 30 points. Back in 2020, how did Biden do? Well, he won the unions by not as well as Clinton did, little over 20 points, did better than Hillary Clinton did. The problem is the narrative's been changing. Whereas historically you said, well, it's a no-brainer. Of course, the Democrats are the working class party. They're for the unions. The Republican Party has managed, through its strategists, through its narrative, to rewrite that script and to start to bring more and more unions and working class voters to their sides, flipping these former so-called sort of blue states more in their favor. So now you have what some say is a paradox of a billionaire candidate who the Democrats say has never in his career championed the worker, all of a sudden drawing a lot of sympathy and support from some pretty big influential working middle-class union groups, including the Teamsters Union, which hasn't explicitly endorsed Donald Trump and the Republicans, but has a dalliance with him and may do so. So the Republicans have been siphoning support on the union front. The unions are no longer a sure bet for the Democrats. That's what's interesting about this narrative. A lot of people would say, how is that possible? The Republicans have never been the party of the working class or the middle class. But in this election, all bets are off, which is why you see Kamala Harris, Joe Biden fighting tooth and nail for every union vote they can get.
And what about Trump? Him and J.D. Vance scheduled to campaign together later on in the week. But Trump's been having some difficulties on the campaign trail.
Yeah, Trump and his running mate, J.D. Vance. Now, like you said, these are difficulties that they minimize, downplay, say are artificial difficulties fabricated by their rivals, their Democratic rivals. But a big one in the past week or so, which we've reported on, is the what was called a political stunt by the Democrats at Arlington National Cemetery, one of the most solemn institutions in America, cemetery where military veterans are buried. And in one of the most sacrosanct parts of that cemetery, Section 60, as it's called, Trump had a campaign stop with family members of some of the 13 troops who were killed during the messy American withdrawal from Afghanistan at Abbey Gate in Kabul Airport. And there was an incident in which Arlington Cemetery, and the Army says a cemetery worker who tried to say you're not allowed to campaign in Arlington National Cemetery, it's against the rules, it's a federal violation, that there was apparently a scuffle, and that the aide at the cemetery was somehow manhandled or harassed by one of the Trump campaign people. Trump denies it, but hasn't released any footage to prove what happened in the incident. It has left a bad taste, but some of the Army people who were there with him at the cemetery have signed a statement supporting Trump, saying he's the real one who sticks up for military veterans, even though he has denigrated them on many, many occasions, and is seen by the Democrats as a total hypocrite when it comes to honoring America's military veterans. This has left a sour taste, staging a political campaign in Arlington National Cemetery. He's not the first one to do it, but he's the first one to have this angry reaction to criticism of doing so. J.D. Vance on the campaign trail has also been caught out time and again for what are perceived as misogynistic statements, and not seeming too human in his everyday reactions with people on the campaign trail. Also, the Trump campaign this week postponed what was supposed to be a gala fundraiser at his New Jersey golf course for people who participated in the January 6, 2021 Capitol insurrection, the storming of the Capitol, defenders of those people. That was postponed for unknown reasons. Campaign didn't give a reason. Perhaps it will still take place, but if so, only after the election. So he's been a little bit on the defensive, even though if you speak to the Trump campaign, they say they're in pole position, they're doing fine, nothing to see here, move on.